Hey guys, Kevin here. So let me start by saying that I hope you're all well. Of course, if you're a viewer of this channel and you're like me, you probably are doing quite well, other than a little boredom, because we saw this coming miles down the road, not necessarily as a virus, but we knew that there was going to be a straw that broke the camel's back. We knew that there was going to be a pin that broke the debt bubble. We knew that there was going to be something that would act as a catalyst to rapidly change the cultural divides and things we were seeing going on in the country. So a lot of us were prepared for this. We had gold, guns, ammunition, medicine, everything we needed. So if you're like me, you're just sitting around here bored and probably a little disappointed at some of the not so hot takes the media are trying to ram down our throats right now, selling socialism as an answer to all of our problems. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. Now, I think in a lot of ways, this virus is going to have good outcomes. I think it's already starting to show us that we need to be more self-reliant. We're seeing people who would never go out and buy guns, buying guns, doing things to take care of themselves, moving out of the cities, the urban hellscapes. And I think that will change a lot of things in America, but I hope they don't bring those policies here, especially after what we're seeing right now. Now, if you're watching the media, they're obviously panicked because of this, and we're seeing massive censorship. I've seen censorship in the last week, unlike anything we saw leading up to this. I personally had a Facebook post that was from 3 years ago get dragged up, and I was suspended for 30 days because of it. And I'm not the only one. I know lots of people who said the same thing happened to them. So people are out there fishing, either left-wing activists trying to find stuff to report, or just Facebook trying to ban people who are posting certain things. So we're seeing that, and of course we're seeing the media push really bad takes, trying to sell socialism and globalism as the cure to this modern plague. And of course it's not. Now, I saw a lot of people talking about this, and I thought, well, what can I do to show all of these narratives that are being pushed? And I found the perfect video from AJ Plus, so we're going to watch that. But first, let me just tell you the worst take I saw so far. It was the mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio, saying that we should nationalize factories around New York to produce hand sanitizer. Now, guys, New York is full of bars that are closed down. Bars are full of alcohol like Bacardi 151 and Everclear, same properties as hand sanitizer. All you have to do is mix it with a little aloe vera, and there you have a simple free market solution. Start selling people liquor again. But of course, you know, they want to disrupt the whole supply chain and produce something that's not going to save anyone other than maybe, you know, make them feel a little better because they wipe their hands down.
So let's look at 6 ways that the coronavirus has shown that Bernie Sanders might be onto something. That guy should run for president one day. The obvious first is healthcare. Coronavirus has hit the US when 30 million of us still don't have health insurance, and 500,000 of us go bankrupt every year just trying to pay for medical costs, even with insurance. Bernie Sanders has long advocated for a national healthcare system, Medicare for All, which covers all people with no out-of-pocket costs.
It ends all premiums. It ends all co-payments. It ends the absurdity of deductibles.
And that has been met from both Republicans and Democrats with that all too familiar question. You know the one.
How are we going to pay for it?
How are you going to pay for it?
How are we going to pay for many of these things?
They don't know who's going to pay for it.
How are we going to pay for it?
Doesn't show enough about how we're going to pay for it.
The same way we pay for most healthcare expenses in this country. GoFundMe.
All right, guys, did you see what she did there? That drives me insane when the lefties do this, and they do it a lot. They mock people who ask serious questions. And you see it from the smooth brain left, you know, the college kids, the identity politics voters, the people who don't know better. And they learn that from the people in the media who do know better. This girl, I guarantee you, she knows the answer to that question. How are you going to pay for it? And if she was honest, like Bernie Sanders has been before, she would say, well, you have to raise taxes on everybody. You have to raise taxes on the wealthy, up to 90% on businesses, and that would kill the economy. Job growth would grind to a halt, and it would be especially bad in a time like this. Or you would have to raise the taxes on the middle class, which in many cases, people in the middle class would end up being better off buying private care or having a free market solution because they would pay more in taxes. they raise taxes 20 or 30% to cover Medicare for all, you would be able to buy the best insurance plan in the world for that kind of money. If you're making $70,000, $80,000 a year, that's a huge amount to pay for subpar care, and that's what it would be. It would be subpar because while you're raising taxes, you would have to cut the standard of care. Because even right now, Medicare as it stands is unsustainable. Expenses keep going up and funding keeps dwindling. In fact, it is unsustainable past 2026, as you can see in this graph here.
Enter COVID-19. Tens of thousands of Americans suddenly need rapid testing, hospital beds, and sometimes respirators, and the richest country in the world hasn't been able to provide them. Healthcare workers themselves are not only in short supply, but so is their basic protective gear, like face masks, to safely treat patients. And that's to say nothing of the magazine selection in hospital waiting rooms. It's just the same 3 issues of Highlights magazine. I've already read The Dog Who Helped Save Whales. Drivel.
I think we might need just a little bit of socialism in America, because whoever writes her jokes should be thrown in the gulag. But guys, she is right about something. We were not prepared for this virus. But you know what else? No other country on earth was prepared, because it's a global pandemic. No country is going to spend trillions of dollars on medical supplies that will expire in 6 months just for the odd chance that there is a once in 100-year plague that sweeps through. That would be insane. It would be unsustainable. And thank God we do live in a country with free market solutions, or some semblance of free market, because we have companies now that don't normally make medical supplies that are manufacturing those medical supplies to meet that demand. It's supply and demand. What does a country like China do? Well, they withhold shipments that are supposed to come here. That's why we don't have a lot of these things like masks and respirators. They're withholding shipments. And are they using them for their own people? Well, no. I mean, we don't know what's going on in China exactly, because they've kicked out all foreign press because they're trying to cover up what's going on there. Their numbers have been the same for a month now. But we do know that China would rather let people die than spend the money that it costs to try to save these coronavirus patients. We've seen that with the pictures of these hospital camps that they've set up. We've seen the news of people being arrested and disappearing because, the government found out they coughed once in a store. It's nuts. And we're seeing this trial run of socialized medicine here, and we're seeing how horrifying it can get, with cities like New York saying they're going to turn people away. People asking for universal do not resuscitate orders, prioritizing patients and rationing. That's socialized medicine, and it's horrifying.
Our massively privatized system is clearly not designed to handle a national crisis like this, and that's dawning on everyone, which is why we're now hearing a strangely familiar tune from a far too familiar face.
Earlier this week, I met with the leaders of health insurance industry who have agreed to waive all co-payments for coronavirus treatments, extend insurance coverage to these treatments, and to prevent surprise medical billing.
Okay, but how are we gonna pay for it, right? Anyone? Weird. In fact, coronavirus is giving some corporate media pundits ideological whiplash.
In the space of 3 weeks, I've gone from asking questions like, how do we pay for certain policies, to retweeting tweets from the likes of Bernie Sanders and Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez.
Oh, Lady Chatterley, you naughty girl.
So let me just say this. Corporations doing things to help people, that's not socialism. Look, these corporations, I don't want to defend big corporations, but they're made up of people like you and me, people who are invested in this country, people whose kids are going to grow up in this country. So those people are going to make decisions that in a hard time will benefit themselves and their country. Now, they also have a profit motive, and thank God they do, because they are motivated to find a cure to this. They are motivated to try to help people right now so they can rebound and get back into business as quickly as possible. Without that profit motive, motivating them to try to find a cure, to try to keep people healthy, imagine where we'd be. You know, if the government doesn't have funding, what do? Well, they do what they just did. They borrow money from the Federal Reserve. They inflate the dollar. That's not a good long-term solution to anything.
Medical debt from surviving coronavirus will further strap Americans during what could be an economic depression as a result of the pandemic. Before this all happened, Bernie Sanders warned about the crippling cost of medical debt and called to drop all of it. That was in addition to his calls to drop $1.6 trillion in student loan debt. Now that millions are out of work, that radical idea of dropping debt isn't all that radical anymore. New York's Attorney General just suspended collections on both medical and student debt in response to the pandemic. Sure, it's only for 30 days, but that's just enough time to pack your bags and get a one-way flight to Costa Rica. They're cheap. Don't come back. Never return.
So she brought up two things I think we need to talk about. First was the idea that deferments are some sort of socialism. That's the opposite of the truth. Deferments are a free market solution. Companies offered deferments long before this virus came along. They would help you if you were in a time of crisis or if you just made some mistakes. They would help you stay in your home by deferring payments or getting you on a payment plan to catch up. They did it with car notes too. In fact, me and Wendy did this a long time ago when she was hospitalized. They deferred our car payments. So there are lots of free market solutions out there specifically for people in crisis. And they benefit, these companies benefit by keeping you in your home or keeping you in your car, because it's a lot better for them to have you eventually catching up with your payments than trying to repossess something and then get whatever equity's left out of that. As far as student loans, the other thing, student loans and paying off student debt. Guys, we just borrowed $2 trillion to give people a one-time payment of a couple $1,000s. We borrowed that money with interest from the Federal Reserve. Well, not with much interest because they did scrap the interest rate, but they normally would not do that. We would be borrowing with interest instead of printing the money. And either way, it's money that we're adding to our national debt, which is already $22 trillion. So all you're going to do is see massive inflation, cause massive inflation. So it's much better to try to find these free market solutions. And of course, if you did have socialized education, past what we already have with public schools, the universities, they are so expensive now, they would not operate at the same level they are now. We wouldn't see these grand colleges. We would not see these university medical centers and all of these research labs continue. The government would do the same thing they're trying to do now with healthcare. They'd start rationing. And of course, they'd also limit what classes you can take because the government's not going to pay for you to get a degree in feminist theory or African dance.
Coronavirus has exposed just how little job security workers in this country have. 4 in 10 hourly workers don't have paid sick leave. And overall, the less money you make, the less likely you are to have it. Back in 2015, Bernie was a co-sponsor of the Family and Medical Leave Insurance Bill and spoke some pretty prescient words.
We have a situation where people in this country, by the millions, have no guaranteed sick leave. And especially in areas like the food industry, sick people are handling our food. And the reason for that is that they do not have any paid sick leave.
Yeah, restaurant workers not having sick leave is truly the cruelest twist of consumerist capitalism. COVID or not, illnesses inevitably get passed to the customers. If you think about it, restaurant owners are basically outsourcing the diarrhea. And that's the real trickle-down economics. In our current crisis, restaurant workers and other tipped workers, hourly wage earners, gig workers, domestic workers, and farm workers have all been hit the hardest. Shifts are disappearing, workers are being let go, and if they or their loved ones get sick, most of them can't take time off. Bernie has supported legislation for those workers in particular through his workplace democracy plan, which among other things has sought protections for Uber and Lyft drivers, saying companies shouldn't be able to misclassify workers as independent contractors or label them as a supervisor, and calls for just cause legislation which would prohibit employers from firing workers for anything other than their performance on the job.
So let's talk about two things here. First thing she talked about was the idea that workers should have more programs to help them out and that the government should demand that these companies offer things like paid sick leave. Well, let me say this. We would have a much better workplace environment in this country, better pension packages, everything across the board, if we hadn't spent the last 30 years importing laborers, importing both unskilled and skilled workers from other countries, people with lower expectations, people who flood the work supply. Because we've done that, these companies do not have to compete for skilled workers or even unskilled workers. And I remember when I was first starting out, when I was in high school, I was working for a big shoe store franchise, and they offered paid sick leave. You'd have to earn it. You'd have to work there a certain amount of months before you would start accumulating days of paid sick leave, but they offered it because the labor was in shorter supply, because these companies actually had to fight for good employees and offer better packages. That's why back in the 60s and 70s, all of these people we call boomers, they all had these Cadillac pension plans because the companies needed workers. We weren't outsourcing jobs to other countries. We were keeping manufacturing in our country, and people had to compete for employees. Now, the other part of that is that they want the government to demand that these companies provide these things. Well, what are the companies going to do? Right now, a lot of these companies are barely making it, and they may not make it through this crisis. So what are they going to do? Well, they'll lay off people, or they'll change them from regular employees to independent contractors. Something our family business already does. We have people who are independent contractors because we're a small business. We can't afford to pay everybody as full-time employees because we only actually work a couple days of every month. That's when we make all of our money. So all of these companies, they would just have to lay people off or change them to independent contractors. Well, that brings up the second point she brought up, that we need to democratize the workforce, and we can no longer allow companies to do that. So what do companies do then? Well, somebody like my wife and I, we would say, well, screw you. We're just either going to operate off the radar or we'll shut down. There's no way to sustain that, not for small businesses. And then these same liberals, these same left-wing socialists, well, they complain about companies like Amazon and these monopolies. Well, that's how you get monopolies. You make it impossible for small businesses to operate. And we've seen the failures of democratized workforces before. We see it in cities like Detroit and Baltimore. There's a reason the South has so many jobs coming in. All of the manufacturing is moving to these states that are hire at will, fire at will. Because like the last thing she brought up, this idea that you can't fire people for any other reason than bad job performance. Well, what do people say when they get fired? Oh, well, they discriminated against me. They were firing me because I'm gay or black or for any other reason besides the fact that they were bad workers. And then how do you prove that?
Which would mean a pandemic wouldn't be just cause to fire you, but not finishing your wet food and only eating the dry is. She's fired. And
of course she has cats. Now, I want to show you guys just how stupid this idea is, that the government would tell companies that they can't hire and fire people, or that they can't fire people during this pandemic. Think about your local restaurant. Now, the virus starts spreading. Your local restaurant, let's say it's a small business or even a franchise, but they hire 12 people to cover their Friday evening shift. Well, not as many people are coming in. The virus is spreading. People are getting a little nervous. So right there, they're losing money. They're not bringing in as much income as they were. But they can't fire anybody, so they cut people's hours. Then you have the government tell them, well, we are no longer going to allow you to take dine-in customers. So right there, their business is cut at least in half. But they can't fire anyone, so they cut people's hours even more. On top of that, they're having to throw out half of their food, half of their meat and produce, which costs them thousands of dollars. Then the virus gets worse. People start coming in sick. It's costing them and maybe endangering their health. So what do? Well, they shut down. They've already lost so much money. They're paying into all of these people's 401ks if they do that, or paying payroll tax and unemployment insurance on these people. They can't hire them as independent contractors because the government won't allow that under these laws. So what do? Well, they shut down because they couldn't fire a few people just to keep the business going and perhaps rehire them later. The business closes down completely. And of course, startup costs a lot more than maintaining a business. So why would that business come back? Again, it just gives more power to these monopolies, these McDonald's, these Amazons. They just absorb more of that market, and the small business owners get screwed again.
And wouldn't you know it, with COVID-19, Congress has now mandated paid sick and family leave as part of their emergency relief package.
So you can take up to 2 weeks off and you will be paid your full wage, and you can take up to 3 months off and be paid 2/3 of your pay. For people who work these gig jobs, independent contractors, they get a tax credit of the equivalent amount. So that's a sea change. I mean, workers have been calling for this for years, and we finally got it.
Yeah, okay, let's temper the excitement because it actually only covers 48% of the workforce and also offers tax credits to companies for providing sick leave.
Unfortunately, what she said is true, guys. The left used this crisis. They exploited it to put part of their agenda through, and there are going to be very long-term consequences for that agenda. Thank God they didn't get everything they wanted with the package that Pelosi had put forward, but they still got way too much ground from all of this, and unfortunately there weren't enough people on the right speaking out against this. You know, people want to do what's politically expedient, and we don't think long-term, and that's how we got the gig economy in the first place, and now they want to shut down the gig economy. Well, first it was manufacturing economy, then it was service economy, then it was gig economy. What comes after gig economy? The black market economy, because that's what they're pushing us into. People gravitate towards jobs like Uber was in the beginning because it's free market, because it gave them the ability to do what they wanted and make easy money without all of the regulations and taxes. And then they start clamping down on that. Well, if people want to be taxi drivers, they'd be taxi drivers. But the fact is that it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars just to get a taxi medallion in a place like New York City. So crushing the gig economy, putting these pressures on these small businesses, it's only going to result in more economic retardation and, of course, long-term bubbles again being built. You need to let companies learn from their mistakes. There should be painful consequences. And I know the coronavirus is not like the original circumstances that brought us towards that first round of bailouts we saw. But, you know, we should have not bailed them out back then, and maybe they would have learned from their mistakes. Maybe they would have kept more cash on hand. Maybe they would have lent to people who couldn't sustain 3 months of mortgage payments. I mean, we just keep repeating the same mistakes, and every time our debt bill keeps getting higher and higher.
Another Bernie prophecy that's coming true is corporate greed. McDonald's, in fact, secretly lobbied the Trump administration to not expand paid sick leave benefits for workers any further. And man, would I love to have been a fly on the wall during that negotiation. Mr. President, it would be a shame if we had to discontinue the fillet of fish. Stop right there. Who do you want me to kill? Then there's Bernie's line, you know, the one about the millionaires and the billionaires. It can sometimes get tiresome, but you really start to see the depths of billionaires' greed in times like this. Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos, a man who made more money today than your entire bloodline, agreed to finally give workers 2 weeks paid sick leave for those infected with coronavirus, but not before he refused to shut down factories in Spain and Italy where 5 workers there were diagnosed with it.
Now, I don't want to defend Amazon. I detest Amazon and a lot of these big corporations. But the fact is that the government created these monsters. They gave them huge tax breaks. I think that we should be giving small businesses these tax breaks, if anything, or just reduce taxes across the board and allow these companies to fail. Don't bail them out when they get in trouble. Jeff Bezos and Amazon, it's a horrible company, but it's made up of people who agreed to do those jobs. And the people supporting Amazon are not people like myself. I detest them. I wouldn't buy a thing from Amazon. I guarantee you it's women like this, people who are these socialist hypocrites who buy half of the things in their home from Amazon, but then rail against Jeff Bezos. The truth is that we should have never bailed out corporations back in the early 2000s. We shouldn't be bailing them out now. But a company like Amazon that delivers items to houses all over the world, they are critical in a time like this. So punishing them is not going to hurt Jeff Bezos. He's already made his fortune. It's going to hurt those people dependent on those products who need their products delivered, because the government's gone and shut down all the small businesses that would otherwise provide those products.
Now everyone's talking about social distancing. Well, no one is more socially distant than Bernie Sanders. He doesn't even like wishing people a happy birthday.
I'm not good at pleasantries. If you have your birthday, I'm not going to call you up to congratulate you, so you love me and you write nice things about me. I've been amazed at how many people respond to, happy birthday. Oh, Bernie, thanks so much for calling.
All right, now that's just stupid. Everybody knows Bernie Sanders is a grumpy old man, a curmudgeon. This has nothing to do with anything. Let's see what their last one is. I did love the look on those people's faces, though, when he said that. It says everything.
We're all in this together. We've heard that from many people when talking about coronavirus, everyone from the head of the World Health Organization, to Madonna in a bathtub full of rose petals, to Vice President Mike Pence.
We're all in this together.
And by this, I mean the ark that I've been building in my yard, which will whisk us away from God's plague. Now I need 2 of every straight animal. Not you, flamingos. There's no question that we are all in this together when it comes to an international health crisis. But whether or not you survive it absolutely depends on your privilege and wealth. Because from our healthcare to our jobs to how we get our food, the US isn't designed for solidarity, collectivity, or the common good. It's designed for a few people to get rich, get excellent healthcare, or have job stability. The rest of us scrape by. And Bernie Sanders has spent his political career pointing that out.
So just because Bernie Sanders has said something his whole life doesn't mean he's right. Most people grow with age. Most people learn from their mistakes. We don't remain the ideologues and the liberals we were when we were 16-year-old schoolboys. We read books on economics. We see the consequences of these policies. Policies like being a global economy. This idea that we're all in this together. Well, being in this together is what got us into this mess. When are we going to put America first and the health of Americans first? And this idea that America is this greedy nation where nobody has a chance couldn't be further from the truth. Our poor live better than the middle class in most countries. The people here in America have all kinds of things that other people don't. The reason Italy has such a high death rate is because they have so many people crammed into one house. Generations live in one house there because it's too expensive to buy a house for a single family. Here, most Americans have single family homes. The majority of us do. And that's because we have a free market system, because we're a prosperous country. And yes, there are companies out there seeking to make a profit even in times of disaster, but can you blame them? And in the long run, is it hurting us? If they're seeking to make a cure, if they're seeking to make more masks or sell more canned soup? Of course not. And trying to regulate these companies to death and destroying our country in the process for short-term solutions is not just asinine, it's nefarious. And people like Bernie Sanders, they know what they're doing. They have been subversives all their lives. And sadly, that's how socialism operates. They usurp whenever they can. They let no crisis go to waste. Anyway, guys, I guess that's all I have for now. I'll try to do more videos. I think I'm getting a little rusty, you know. It's been a long time. We've had some things going on here, and, you know, it's the way things are now. You gotta put family first always, so that's what I do. But I'll try to make more videos, especially now with all of this going on. Like and subscribe and share the video if you can. I'll catch you guys later.